All right, guys, welcome back to History 1301. Today we are going to finish up on the first part of the early republic. This is a time period, after the Articles of Confederation going into the U.S. Constitution. Last time we talked all about Washington's presidency. And then today we are going to finish up with the election of 1796, the Adams administration, and the election of 1800, which resulted in Thomas Jefferson becoming only the third president of the United States. And we'll talk about, the election process that led to him being elected in that year. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, today's lecture should be relatively short. We've already done a lot of the legwork when it comes to what's happening under the U.S. Constitution. Remember, they had a lot of the same issues that they were experiencing before, especially when it comes to, the question of government power, taxation, foreign policy. Under the U.S. Constitution, they were able to deal with them, right? But it didn't come without criticism. And so what we started to see during, those early years of the new republic is political divisions, right? So it's going to be like two parties are starting to develop. We talked all about the Federalists and all about the Democratic Republicans. And things are just going to get worse now that Washington is out of office. It's going to get pretty wild. And John Adams is going to be pretty much like the only Federalist left, okay, before the Democratic Republicans take over. And, we'll talk all about that era of good feelings when it's basically just one party dominating American politics, okay? So let's go ahead and begin. So, we talked all about Jay's Treaty, Pinckney's Treaty, how Pinckney's was with the Spanish, right? And it heavily favored the United States, whereas Jay's Treaty was with the English. And, it wasn't so good for the Americans, right? Because it gave a lot of concessions to the British. And one of the things that they never actually promised to stop doing was impressment. So that's something that's going to come back further on down the line, okay? When we get to the election of 1796, Washington has been president already for 2 terms, and he decides, that's it. We're done. Well, I'm done, right? I want to go back home. He's really kind of tired of all the squabbling, political bitterness and all of that. There's 2 parties that have basically risen up during this time. One side is the Federalist. Washington tried really hard to stay above all the partisan politics, but at the end of the day, he usually aligned with the Federalists. And so, there is going to be that opposition party that comes up out of it, which is, of course, the Democratic Republicans. And the interesting thing about that is that both parties believe that they are the inheritors of America's revolutionary ideals. And so they both consider that their views are legitimate. Okay, so it's going to be kind of difficult to get them, either one of them, to back away from that point of view. Okay. So anyways, let's get to the election of 1796. It's going to be Thomas Jefferson for the Democratic Republican Party against John Adams, the Federalist, for the presidency. Washington in his farewell address tried to warn them about the dangers of political parties, as well as the dangers of entanglements with foreign alliances. And here, he's talking specifically about the wars that are going on in Europe. So he tries to warn them about that. And he also sets a very important precedent in only serving for 2 terms, right? No other president is going to run for a 3rd term until FDR, during the Depression and World War II. But before that, everybody they stopped at 2 because Washington didn't do more than 2, right? So he's going to set the bar pretty high for everybody, for all his predecessors. But like I said, it's going to take a constitutional amendment after FDR ran and won a historic 4th term in the 40s, 1945. So, we'll talk about that later. Anyways, so he decides not to run for president, which means that now we need a new president. Who is going to be the next American president? And John Adams, he also has a lot of, prestige that goes back to the American Revolution and all of that. He was a lawyer from Massachusetts. We know all about him from the American Revolution. He was a member of the Continental Congress. He served as a diplomat to France, during the American Revolution. And he was Washington's vice president and a member of the Federalist Party for 8 years. So this isn't somebody that wasn't well known or anything like that. He just wasn't George Washington, right? I mean, he definitely had big shoes to fill. But Thomas Jefferson was Adams's opponent, and we already know that they disagreed on just about everything when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to government power, all of that stuff. And ultimately what ends up happening here is Adams is going to win. Adams is going to win the presidency. But because Jefferson comes in second place, he becomes the VP, right? So there's this little weird quirk in the Constitution that was later fixed with the 12th Amendment. But basically what it said was that the person with the most electoral votes gets to be president. And remember that for Washington, he was unanimous, right? So there was like no ifs or buts about it. But in this case, it was a very dirty campaign. It was highly, highly contested. And Adams comes out on top. He is a Federalist, but Jefferson gets the second most electoral college votes, and he gets to become the vice president. And so this is kind of weird, right? Because it's like, imagine if it would have been Donald Trump president and Hillary Clinton VP, right? As scandalous as, this presidency is and controversial and everything. Just imagine what it would have been like if it would have been Trump and Hillary, in the White House right now. So pretty wild stuff. Anyways, it's going to make for a very interesting presidency. There's going to be a lot of debating between the two. I mean, the two don't like each other, period, right? But nevertheless, there's going to be very little harmony in the White House for Adams's presidency. All right, so let's talk about Adams's presidency, because there's going to be some pretty significant stuff that goes on that I want to talk about prior to getting to Jefferson's election. The first one deals with the XYZ affair. Now, a little background on the XYZ affair. Basically, what's happening here is after Jay's Treaty, right, with the English, the French are going to be pretty pissed off with the United States about that, because remember, France is at war with England, right? And so the United States goes and makes this treaty with the British, and the French don't like that. So to retaliate, the British start seizing several American ships, okay? And so to avoid war with the French, Adams is going to send some diplomats to France to meet with the French government to try to avoid a war, right? Because one of the things about Adams is that he really believes that we're going to go to war with the French, because essentially the French are at war with everybody, right, at this point. So the French foreign minister refuses to meet with this American, delegation, with these American diplomats. And three men approach the Americans, right? And they're basically known as X, Y, and Z. And, they try to bribe the United States. They try to tell them, if the United States pays a bribe, actually is what I was trying to say. If they pay a bribe to the French government, then the French will meet with them, right? What they basically want is $250,000, right? So they want the Americans to pay a bribe in order to meet with the French government. And Adams, refuses, right? The Americans refuse that. Adams is completely swept up by it. He thinks it is such a an insult, right? And on top of that, when news breaks out about it, the American people are just stricken with just anti-French sentiment, right? It just sweeps the nation when news of this XYZ affair gets out, okay? And so, anyways, the Americans see it as a complete lack of respect, and basically, like, all hell breaks loose because now Adams's worst fears of going to war with the French looks like it might be happening. Okay, so this is going to result in this quasi war with France, which basically means like it's not a real war; it's just perceived, right? Like he really believes that we're going to be going to war with them. So from 1798 to 1800. Both naval fleets are going to be openly plundering each other, right? The French and the Americans raiding each other's ships. And Adams is really starting to worry about a possible full war. I mean, it looks like we're just one step away. So this made him extremely sensitive to any kind of dissent, any kind of, criticism, not just from the Democratic Republicans, but basically anybody within the government. And remember, the White House is essentially split into two parties. Okay, so this is extremely unusual, but I want you to sort of wrap your head around that, right? You got like two camps working at the same time in the same administration. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so to him, the country's on the verge of going to war with France, and there's just so much partisanship, right? So much political division. And it's escalating. Each party has like their own newspapers that write stories about, the other in a negative way, or, they only do like positive stories about the politicians that they like or the party that they like. So kind of like today, right, in a way. So it's not that hard to imagine. But what is kind of difficult to sort of wrap our heads around is what comes next. It's the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. And basically, this is a series of acts. Okay, so several acts are going to be passed during this time. They are mostly aimed at foreigners, okay? Because remember, the fear is that we are going to war with the French, and so we're trying to stop any kind of seditious speech and stuff like that. But, get a load of this. So basically, because it is aimed at foreigners, these laws, right, these Alien and Sedition Acts, gives the president the power to expel any foreigners that are perceived to be a threat in the United States, okay? So if they could be maybe working as spies, or they could be, trying to work against the U.S. government from within, then they need to be, kicked out. They need to be, how do you call it? I don't know. How do they call it? When they kick them out of the nation. Deported. There we go. And so, yeah, foreigners could be deported or jailed by the president during wartime. And so, this is where it gets kind of tricky because there's a residency here for citizenship. And so that number is also going to grow from 5 years to 14, right? So they're becoming extremely sensitive about who's allowed to, become a U.S. citizen. There's a huge, shroud of suspicion over foreigners, especially French ones. And there's these huge fines and prison time for speaking out against the American government, right? In particular about Adams's administration. And so when you look at this, right, that anybody could be jailed or sentenced or fined for speaking out against the current administration, the Democrats are the ones that are going to see this as a political, personal attack on them, right? Because they do this already, right? They're always constantly talking bad about Adams and talking bad about how, he's going to get us into this war with the French and how he doesn't have the stuff. And so, I mean, the Alien and Sedition Acts were designed to limit any kind of seditious speech or dissent that was coming from foreigners, right, within the United States. But what ends up happening here is the Democratic Republicans are going to see this as a personal attack on them, because who else is going to be criticizing Adams and his administration? It's going to be the Democratic Republicans, right? So they see this as kind of like as a ploy, right? So what's the result of this? Well, several things, right? Because what this law is basically doing, or the series of laws does, is it is severely limiting free speech, okay? Do we have free speech in America? Yes, we do. It's constitutionally protected. But Democratic Republicans are going to see that this law is overreaching presidential power, right? By limiting what people can and cannot say. I mean, like, at what point do we draw the line and say, hey, you know, you talking badly about the president is seditious speech and is deserving of a prison sentence, right? And so Democratic Republicans, this is what they've been arguing against the whole time. You know, strong central government, they're highly suspicious of it. And this is what they fear is the biggest threat to our democracy, is the overreach of executive power, the overreach of federal power. And so they respond to the Alien and Sedition Act by passing a series of resolves, okay, known as the Kentucky and Virginia resolution. So let's talk about that. Saying that the acts are unconstitutional is just a part of the argument, okay? Because they're going to take things a lot further, okay? What the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions state is that basically if the government, if the national government oversteps its powers, right? In a way that it's like evident to them, right? Like it's obvious that this is what they're doing is unconstitutional and shouldn't be allowed. Then that the states, what they're arguing is that the states have a right, a responsibility to nullify those laws, right? So they're basically saying, if we, the states believe that the federal government has overstepped its power, or that the president has done something that is unconstitutional, right, by passing a law that so infringes on our constitutional rights, like free speech, then the states can simply ignore those laws. And so that kind of argument is very much hand in hand with the belief of states' rights, okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is that the authors of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, right? The VP doing this. Now, they were done in secret, right? It was done anonymously, but they did it nonetheless. And they are challenging directly what Adams is trying to do here, right? They claim that these acts are unconstitutional, that they're a violation of the First Amendment. And so they write these resolutions basically saying that they are refusing to enforce these laws, and that judicial review basically says that the states cannot interpret the Constitution, right? Like we already established that, right? With the judicial, oh my gosh, what was it called? It was at the very beginning of the thing. I'm drawing a huge blank right now. Oh my gosh, the Judicial Act of 1786, I think, 1786. Yeah, 1786. Oh, anyways, okay. So you know what I'm saying, right? So remember that it established the Supreme Court as the highest court in the land, and then, you know, all the district courts and blah, blah, blah. And by saying that only the Supreme Court had the ability to judge the constitutionality of laws, right? It's already been established. But then here come the Alien and Sedition Acts, and here come James Madison and Thomas Jefferson saying, nope, we don't like what the president has done here. We don't like what Congress has done. This is unconstitutional. Therefore, we are arguing that we don't have to obey the law. If we believe it's unconstitutional, if we believe that it's infringing on our rights, then we're just going to nullify the law, right? It's like if it's null and void because it's unconstitutional. The problem with that mentality, the problem with that argument, like I said, is that they already passed a law that says that only the Supreme Court can judge the constitutionality of a law. The states cannot do that, okay? Only the Supreme Court can. So the interesting thing about all this is that kind of mentality, that kind of argument is going to stick around, right? It's sowing the seeds. It's planting that seed of states' right and the doctrine of nullification. this argument is going to come back again later on when we get to Jackson, and then when we get closer to the Civil War. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, let's see what's next. Oh, let's talk about the election of 1800, because this is it. This is essentially where the chapter ends, and you can go on to, oops, I'm so sorry. You can go on to the next part of the lecture. So Adams is basically a one-term president, right? Really unpopular. Like I said, he's not Washington. The man is not without his flaws, but he, like I said, he really believed that he was doing what was best in the interest of the nation, inheritors of the democratic ideals. I mean, the guy was deep in it, right? Since the beginning. So, but unfortunately, though, the Federalist Party is really starting to lose ground here. The Democratic Party is growing. The Democratic Republican Party is growing. And Thomas Jefferson feels like, okay, this time, right, I'm not going to come into second place. This time I'm going to win. And they become highly, highly organized, right? 4 years of this presidency really intensify the rivalry between the two parties, between these two people as well. Adams is hoping to get reelected, but it's not going to work out quite as much. Like I said, this election is going to get very nasty, very ugly, all kind of like mudslinging and stuff going on. Adams is accused of being a closet monarchist, right? Because of the Alien and Sedition Act. They're basically saying that he wishes he was king, right? That he secretly wishes he was. Jefferson is called an atheist because of the Jefferson Bible. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's pretty interesting too. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff is going on. There's rumors about both of them. And, ultimately the Federalist Party is just really disorganized, unlike the Democratic Republicans. So let's talk about that. It goes to the Electoral College, right? It's in the Constitution. They're going to decide. What ends up happening here is that the Democrats are almost a little bit too organized. And so one person was supposed to withhold a vote. But then at the end, they couldn't remember who was supposed to do it and who wasn't. So there's a little bit of confusion. And what ends up happening is, forget about Adams. Adams is not going to win. But there's so much confusion because they don't know exactly who's supposed to do it and who isn't. But anyways, it ends up in a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And so, yeah, Aaron Burr, that guy, the one that shot Hamilton later. Not yet. This is part of the reason why. So anyways, because there is a tie, right? It goes to the House of Representatives. Okay. When there isn't a clear winner selected or elected by the Electoral College, it goes to the House of Representatives. Okay. Now, the interesting, ironic thing about this is that the House of Representatives is actually still, the majority of them are Federalists who themselves have just been voted out, right? But they're still in office, at least until, until inauguration. And so Adams is not going to win. And so the House of Representatives has to essentially decide. They have to vote for themselves. Who is going to become the next president of the United States? Is it going to be Thomas Jefferson or is it going to be Aaron Burr? And so this is where, like my favorite founding father comes in. I still sigh when I think of him. Alexander Hamilton, who still, is he still has a lot of influence. Oh man, he was such an influence. I mean, you know this already, but so the House of Representatives is really kind of looking to him for advice. And, he knows them both, right? That Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton do not like each other. They're like polar opposites, right? One was a Federalist, one was a Democratic Republican. They disagree on just about everything. But Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton also know each other relatively well, but they also don't like each other. And so, you know, the Federalists that are in the House of Representatives, they have to choose who, you know, of these two Democratic Republicans is going to win the White House. And Hamilton's got a tough choice here because he doesn't like either one of them. He disagrees on, you know, on just about everything with both of them. But at the end of the day, Hamilton convinces his fellow Federalists in the House of Representatives to go with Thomas Jefferson, right? He dislikes them both, but he believes that Jefferson is the lesser of two evils. And so, you know, what's going to happen here is Thomas Jefferson becomes the next or the third president of the United States. And Aaron Burr becomes his vice president, who later on, he's going to get into a duel with Alexander Hamilton and wounding him, you know, to death. So he kills him. No. But anyways, if you haven't seen Alexander Hamilton, you know, the musical Hamilton, if you haven't heard the songs, I really recommend them. It's really hard for me to lecture about this stuff and not hear the songs like in the back of my head. I've seriously been obsessing over this musical for several years now. I strongly urge you to look at it, to watch it, to take it in. It is seriously one of the best, you know, plays in my ever made, I think. Seriously, that good, like better than Phantom of the Opera, better than, you know, anything. It's like it rivals like any of, in my opinion, you know, it's like a modern day opera, right? Like classical music. It's fantastic. I love it, and you will too. So I know that it's on Disney Plus. I think you would really benefit from it, from watching it. Just not just as like as a piece of, you know, American pop culture, but also to, you know, if you're having trouble with some of these terms and stuff that we've been discussing so far in this semester, I would strongly urge you to watch it. Right? I really wanted to have like a watch party, have all of us do it, but I couldn't get it. I was trying to do it on Zoom, and every time that I would play it, like to see, like testing it to see if it'll work, the screen would go blank. So, you know, if anybody knows of a way to have like a Zoom watch party or something, or something we can do, I would love to do it, even if it's like for extra credit or something. So if anybody knows of a way to do it, let me know. Okay. Anyways, last thing I want to mention about this lecture is the 12th Amendment. Because there was this little quirk, right, about first place and second place. Yeah, they're going to fix that. They're going to take care of it with the 12th Amendment, which, you know, selects the vice president separately, right? So that we don't have a Trump Clinton administration, right? So anyways, all right. So the electors would be casting separate, the electors would be casting a separate ballot for the vice president and the president. And so what's the big takeaway from this? What is so important about this lecture, about the election of 1800? We have a peaceful transfer of power. We're going from the Federalist Party, right? Washington administration, Adams's administration, and then now Democratic Republicans. The bloodless revolution has taken place, and nobody got killed except Hamilton later. Not right now. But anyways, okay. So what does this mean? This means that this American experiment in democracy is a success. So far, so good. We'll see what happens next, right? But this is going to be it for me for today. And if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Send me an email, or you can always jump into my Zoom Monday through Friday from 12 to 2. Okay. With that, I'm going to leave you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll see you real soon. Okay. Bye.